Okay, I know I'm recording and I'm looking weird at the camera, but I'm trying to find my PowerPoint. Don't know why it's not showing it to me. Because it's there. Pardon me, I'm sorry. I'm trying. Well, it's not going to show it to you. I don't know what happened between now and the last session. If the PowerPoint's not working. It doesn't give me the option. So we may have to go without PowerPoint. I'll give it one more effort here. Click that off. Click that off. Share. There you are. Came back. I don't know why. All right. Sorry about that. Technology is always a problem, or always presents problems. Well, not always, but presents problems from time to time. And if it's can be found, a technological problem can be found, I can find it. Talking about Adam and Eve, we talked about the sin, we talked about its effect upon us. We have physical death in our lives as a result of their sin. The tree of life was taken away. As far as spiritually speaking, we are responsible for our own sins. Death is a part of our life spiritually because we bring it into our lives. Let's move on. Before we move on, I wanted to read you an article that I found. The trend, even among, as I mentioned before, Christians today, among Christian circles today, is that the Adamic story of the fall is either partial or complete fable. That lady that I read from you in the last hour, she believes it was legend or fable or allegory. It's not real, but it presents a real story, or not a real story, but a real truth, whatever she thinks that truth might be. Well, she's not the only one. There are scholarly people who hold these opinions as well. at biologos, biologos.com, I found the following source of garbage, I think. He says, I'll put it up on the screen, the author does. However, some features in the biblical text suggest that there are other layers of meaning that this traditional view does not account for. Genesis 4 refers to other people in cities, Cain's wife, who do not seem to be descended from Adam or Eve. That's an assumption that is not provable. That's not in their text. That's what I'm adding to it. That they make an assumption there that not necessary anyway. And some elements of Genesis 2 and 3 indicate that at least on some level, the text is describing Adam and Eve as archetypal or figures, statements about all of us. In other words, they're not real. They just give us a truth about ourselves. Some Christian leaders are open to models that see evolution as compatible with Adam and Eve as real historical people. In one version suggested by the theologian Henry Blocher and others, God entered into a special relationship with a pair of ancient historical representatives of humanity about 200,000 years ago in Africa. Genesis retells this historical event using cultural terms that the Hebrews in the ancient Near East could understand. In other words, it's not a fable, but it's a allegory. There's some truth somewhere, somehow, but because they couldn't understand it, then Moses brought it into terms that they could understand, but don't really go looking back in history for a real Adam and Eve is the idea. Other Christians, such as Alistair McGrath and C.S. Lewis, have suggested non-historical models. While in these models, Adam and Eve are not historical in the sense of people, in the sense that people use historical today, the Genesis accounts convey important and inspired theological truths about God and humanity. In one view, the early chapters of Genesis are symbolic stories in the genre of ancient Near Eastern literature. In another, the early chapters of Genesis are compressed literary depiction of a long historical process. What they're saying, I'll sum it up, is you can't count on these things that you're reading in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 as being actual events. They are emblematic of actual events, or they are actual events that are compressed. It happened over thousands of years, and they took enough of pieces of truth out of those thousands of years and made this story just to make it sound like a story so that they could remember it. But it's not, you can't count on this being a true and actual story. But if that's the case, if, for example, Adam and Eve are not historical figures, if there never was a fall as described in Genesis chapter 3 that we talked about in the last hour, then what are we to make of the multitude of times that the New Testament brings up these things? Is the New Testament saying that these factual events were not actually factual? Or I guess that's not the right way to ask the question. The New Testament represents them as factual events, but if what these authors are telling us, they weren't actual events, then the New Testament writers are confused, mistaken, lying, I don't know. What would you call it? Luke is considered the historian, or a historian anyway, of the New Testament. And when his record in Luke chapter 3, he traces the genealogy of Jesus back to where? Adam. Not some figment of Moses' imagination, not some typical example or illustration, not some allegory. He traced it back to the man Adam. He talked about Adam's son, Adam's grandson, Adam's great-grandson, Adam's great-great-great-grandson, Adam's great-great-great-great-grandson, and so forth. These are historical figures. Jude, in the book of Jude, he said that Enoch was the seventh the great, 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 great 7 times from Adam. Was Jude mistaken? I mean, Jude thinks that Adam's a real person, and he had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren up to the 7th generation at least. Beyond that, because the record goes further than that, but Jude introduces us to Enoch as the 7th from Adam. He is in the lineage of Adam, a lineage which Adam did not have if he's not a historical person, if he's just a not a legend, but a allegorical figure. In 2 different letters, the Apostle Paul uses the Genesis 3 narrative to engage in and compare a contrast between the first and second Adam, Romans chapter 5 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He would also mention the serpent deceived Eve in 2 other epistles. Were these not real accounts? Is Paul just making this stuff up? Is he referring to allegories and making us think that they weren't allegories but real? What's going on here? I think it's a bunch of hogwash and garbage that these people are presenting. Why are they doing it? Well, I would think that part of the purpose is to cause us to have doubts in the Word of God. This is Satan's work, guys. And as you continue your work, you're going to read commentaries, you're going to get lots of information, you're going to put a lot of stuff in your head. You need to be discerning. Where is that work coming from? Are they casting doubt upon the Word of God? If they're casting doubt on the Word, I don't care who it is, your favorite author or not, if they're casting doubt on the Word of God, it is the work of Satan. Look with me, I think I have it on the text, Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3. I saw something flash on my screen, so hang on just a second. I'm going to see if I'm still recording. Says I'm recording. Sorry about that. Don't know why it does that. That's not what I want. That's what I want. In Luke chapter 3, beginning in verse 23, now Jesus himself began his ministry about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Heli, the son of Methat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, the son of Janna, skipping down to verse 36, the son of Cainan, the son of Arphaxad, the son of Shem, the son of Noah, the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, the son of Cainan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. What does it do to our faith? If Jesus Christ, the Son of God, if his ancestors were not real. One of the reasons that both Matthew and Luke give us these genealogical records is to help us understand Jesus was human. Mark and John both start with Jesus was the Son of God. Actually, John goes back further than that and says Jesus was God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the Word being Jesus before he became flesh. Mark just said, these are the generations of the Son of God, and speaking of Jesus. So they just focus on the fact that he's the Son of God, but both Matthew and Luke tell us that he is the Son of Man. He came from humanity. He was the seed of God, yes, but he was the seed of man, the Son of Man. If he's not real, why does Matthew and if his ancestors are not real, then why does Matthew and Mark try to prove that they are? What are they trying to prove by saying they are when they weren't? And if Jesus in fact is not what Matthew and Luke say he were, then how are we to trust Matthew and Luke on anything else that Matthew and Luke may have said about Jesus? If the genealogy of Jesus, the members of his genealogy are mythological or mythical, what makes us think that this story that Matthew and Luke have concocted was not mythical as well? I bring it up again. I forget how many times I've broached this subject, but it's so important, brethren, that you understand that you're going to, as you teach, you're going to teach a lot of folks who don't know anything about this, and you probably won't have to bring it up to them. But when your kids and grandkids or your people's kids and grandkids go to college, they're going to hear this stuff. They're going to hear this garbage. They're going to be shown these things. And if they're not prepared with some kind of argument, or at least in the back of their minds, they know, well, I know that's not true because I've studied this. Then their faith is going to be challenged. And professors, especially professors of freshmen in college, have a knack for finding those weak spots in your children's armor, and they attack it viciously. They want you or your kids to believe God is not real, and they will approach it any way they can. This is the work of Satan. Satan does not rest. I'm not sure. Excuse me. Again, something's different here. Recording, share. Okay, I've lost the PowerPoint again. I'm not sure I had it up there when I thought I did. All right, I think I got it right, but I'm not sure. If you can't see me, I apologize. Hopefully you can at least hear me. All right, let's move on. Genesis chapter 3. I think I have it on the screen. Yeah, Genesis chapter 3. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Also, for Adam and his wife, the Lord made tunics of skin and clothed them. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the garden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man and placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So God provides them animal skins for them to cover their nudity. They had tried with the fig leaves, but did not or could not cover themselves sufficiently as they thought they needed to be covered. So God gave them the Hebrew word here is translated as tunics or clothes. What does it say? Tunics, clothing. When you see this word elsewhere in Scripture, it in Genesis later on we'll find the coat of many colors that Joseph wore was described with this word. It's considered a robe. Something that typically goes down to the knees or the ankles, much like you would think of a robe or a long shirt. It was used to describe the garments that the priests would wear, and as described in the book of Leviticus, something that would cover their immodesty. When you think about the priest ascending up on the altar, they'd have to have something to cover themselves sufficiently, and this is the garment that was used. They also wore linen breeches for that purpose. You could think of it as an act of grace for this couple, Adam and Eve, that God provided for them what they either did not provide for themselves or could not provide for themselves. More to the point of the story, as long as Adam and Eve remained in the garden with unrestricted access to the tree of life, they could live immortally. They could continue to live forever, even though their spiritual lives have been separated from God, and they were dead in that sense because they were separated from life. They could continue to live forever if they had access to the tree of life, so God drove them out. The word drove them out or put them out in the text here is the word that is used when Moses and Aaron had come to Pharaoh's court, and Pharaoh was tired of them in Exodus chapter 10, verse 11. He had them expelled. He had them driven out. You can't stay in my courtroom. And it wasn't a politely, let's go on out here. It was a violent driving out. God is driving them out. He's trying to make a point to this couple, Adam and Eve, about what they had done, the results of what they had done. Exodus 34 and Hosea 9, verse 15, use this word referencing how God drove out the nations of Canaan, or in Exodus 34, he would drive them out before Israel got there, or as Israel got there. And also in Hosea, this term is used for the driving out of evildoers from the temple of God. David used this term, it was used of David, that when Saul was trying to take his life or kill David because he felt David was a usurper to the throne, or at least a threat to the throne, Saul drove him out, drove him into the wilderness. So it's usually used in a violent sense, not to say that God took a stick and beat him out, but he wanted them to understand this is punitive. Regardless of what the lady that I read from earlier, this is punitive measure. There is punishment for sin. And then he stationed the cherubim. Had a fellow one time tell me that cherubim were not angels, that they're usually distinct from angels. That may be the case. I always think of an angel when I think of a cherubim. Whatever it was, it's a winged figure, person, being, not a person, but let's go with being. He's a winged being, and we find him on occasions in the scripture. He's placed here at the gate or the entrance to the garden. We find carvings of the cherubim are found on the Ark of the Covenant, and its wings were outstretched. Think of two of them, one on each side of the Ark of the Covenant, and his wings are outstretched, and the other one's wings are outstretched toward him, and this was considered the place where God sits, or the place where mercy sits, the mercy seat of God. You'll find these cherubim also were woven into the curtains that separated the holy place from the most holy place within the tabernacle and the temple. This very curtain was the one that was rent from top to bottom, a curtain that could not have been reached by any man at the top or from the top. This is God doing that, but that's beside another story. But it was rent from top to bottom, restoring, I think, a picture of it anyway, where the cherubim were placed at the gate of the garden to keep man out. The curtain on which the cherubim were woven in the temple was ripped in half, and access was gained once again to the true tree of life, which I believe is Jesus. But we have access back to God through the act that the act of Jesus' crucifixion, because it was at the crucifixion when that curtain was rent in half. I think symbolically so, symbolic of our re-access or gaining access again to the presence of God. I think it's a wonderful picture. You can preach that. It may take you a while to work that one up, but you can preach that. The cherubim was placed at the garden to keep us away from the presence of God, and the cherubim were ripped in half, or at least the curtain on which the cherubim's figures were ripped in half by the crucifixion, or at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, whereby we gain access to God. The fall is a terrible story. Affects all of humanity. And as we read the story of the fall here in Genesis chapter 3, I think we need to, while it's not a allegorical picture, it's a true thing that happened. The same thing, however, happens in our lives. Satan comes in to our lives. He's subtle, he's deceptive, we're innocent, and he takes advantage of that, and we fall from God. He convinces us through lies, through the wiles of Satan, as Paul calls it, to think that God's provisions are not enough for us, or to think that we can do better than what God is doing for us, or to think that God's word is not authoritative. He convinces us of these things, and when he does that, we fall for his lies and fall out of fellowship with God. That's what the word fall means. We have fallen out of fellowship with God. But even in the fall, recorded in Genesis chapter 3, God begins demonstrating and showing us, I'm not leaving you out in the cold. A great gulf has been caused between us and God because of our sins, and we, if we understand that, we hide from God as Adam and Eve tried to hide from God, where our own, Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 64, our righteous acts are but filthy rags. Our fig leaf sowing is not, we can't save ourselves. If we realize that we're lost, if we hear the voice of God from the word of God and understand that we're lost, you can't fix that yourself. It has to be done by God. God is merciful, and he provides that for us. In baptism, the garments of a sacrificial lamb are given to us that we may return into the presence of the holy God. It's a wonderful picture. The gospel starts here in Genesis chapter 3 and continues throughout the Bible. Can't live forever. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Think about it from this perspective. It would be nice to be able to live forever, I suppose, although who would want to in the world as we see it today? But none of us want to die. None of us are saying, I hope I die today so I can go to heaven. That may be the thought of some people as they age and are in a lot of pain or whatever. But for most of us, we're not anxious to get on that bus and go. But at the same time, if we sit down and think about it, we're not anxious to live forever in this old cursed world. And that's what it would be if you lived forever. If the tree of life were not taken away from, so that we would continue to live in a world that, as you'll see in the next few chapters, just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies sin, it would be a horrible place to be, a horrible place to live. In fact, in Genesis chapter 6, it got so bad in that span of time between Adam and Noah, it got so bad, God said, that's it. If I let them continue, it'll just be absolutely corrupt. So he put an end to it. And we'll talk about that in the next few chapters. God's wrath over sin is great. But in this story, we also learn of the mercy of God. Paul writes in Romans chapter 5, where sin increased, grace abounded the more. God's grace is greater, the song says. God's grace is greater than our sin. God's grace can't cover sin from which we will not turn, but there's no sin so great that God's grace cannot cover if we will. The grace and mercy of God. To our knowledge, Eden has passed into oblivion. We'll never see that part of creation again, at least not on this side of eternity. But there's a sense in which it pops up, Eden does, the idea, the concept of Eden, the paradise of God, the living in the presence of God. It pops up from time to time in the scriptures. The temple and tabernacle are both represented as the place where God lives. Well, that's what Eden was. And so, while in the tabernacle and the temple, it's not some place on earth, it's some spot, some locality within Israel. But if you look at some of the carvings that God had placed and the tapestry, the weavings and stuff that God had placed in the tabernacle and upon the temple, you see images of Eden, growth, natural palm trees, pomegranates, things of that nature. I forget all the things that are there, but natural things that would have been emblematic of that paradise of God that God created in the beginning. God is reminding through the tabernacle, through the temple, I'm still here. I want you in my presence. I want you in my existence. Think about Eden. You had it. It can come again. And so when we get to the book of Revelation, John says he saw a new heaven and a new earth. I don't think it's a recreation of what we have here, but I think he's picturing for us a Eden where we can be with God again. In fact, what's described there in Revelation 21 has a pretty striking resemblance to the garden of God, the Garden of Eden. It even has the tree of life in it. And I believe that tree of life is Jesus himself. Genesis chapter 4. Let's take a gander at it. What time is it? It's got plenty of time. Genesis chapter 4. There it is on the screen. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife. Of course he knew her. Well, the word knew there is, or know, there is a sexual term, sexual knowledge, experiential knowledge. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore a son, bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Yahweh, the relationship God, says to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up and against Abel his brother and killed him. Then Yahweh, the relationship God, said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. This is a little bit stronger than Adam's curse. Adam's curse was that when you till the ground, you're going to have to work hard. By the sweat of your brow, it's going to bring forth to you. But Cain was told, you're going to get nothing. You're going to be a fugitive and a vagabond because you'll settle down to farm and it'll give you nothing. So you'll be traveling from place to place trying to find something. You won't get anything. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. And I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And Yahweh said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, mercy. Whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Adam knew his wife. We understand that's a phrase that refers to intercourse, marital intercourse, or could be non-marital if they're not married. Some think, because of where it's found in chapter 4, after the events of chapter 3, after Adam and Eve have been expelled from the garden, that this took place outside of the garden. I don't really think so. This would not be, if Moses did this, it would not be the first occasion where he stepped back into a context and picked up something that he had left out because there wasn't room for it in the first recording. He now records. I think this is still in the garden. It's not really too important where this takes place, but I think this conception, maybe even the birth, took place within the garden. I think we don't know how long they were in the garden. Was it 10 years? Was it 20 years? Was it 150 years? Was it a day? We just don't know. And I think it's very possible, likely even, that the conception took place in the garden. The birth may have taken place outside the garden, but I don't think we need to make that a matter of strong discussion. Don't necessarily think this was outside the garden. The word Cain, or name Cain, means, as is defined for us in the text, to acquire or possess something. I have acquired something. I possess something, and I have acquired a son from the Lord. And it may be that Eve thinks this is, or Adam thinks this is the one about whom God spoke to Satan in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. So she says, I have acquired a son from the Lord. She has another son. His name is Abel. It means breath, something transitory, something that moves or goes away quickly. And maybe she names him this because of how brief, she had some inclination somehow of how brief his life would be. He'll be here as a breath. That's a breath or a sigh. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting that he has this name. Sometimes in the Bible, people are renamed because of how events transpired in their life, and they were given this name. The indication here seems that it was given to him at birth, but it's just kind of odd that his name fits his life, a brief span here on the earth. What caused the fight? Well, apparently it was jealousy. Why did they offer sacrifices to God? Well, apparently they had been taught, according to the New Testament, Abel offered according to faith, and faith comes by hearing the word of God. So Abel knew to offer sacrifices to God because God had told him to do so. I have no doubt at all that Cain had been told the same thing. What were they told to offer? Some say, well, they must have been told to offer a lamb. I kind of lean that way, but it's not necessarily the case. It could be that they were told to offer from their heart the first fruits, which Cain didn't do. He just offered fruit. Abel offered the first fruits. He offered a bloody sacrifice, which is something that God would eventually require of the Jews. But there were other sacrifices that did not involve blood. The wave offering found in the book of Leviticus, it was not blood, it was wheat or grain, flour. So it's not necessary that it be a blood sacrifice. But the indication is Abel offered according to what he was told. Cain offered according to what he felt. He wanted to do what was right in his own eyes. And that wasn't necessarily what God had asked for. Cain was more pleased in a sacrifice that was suitable to him. And if you think about it from a materialistic standpoint, offering the first fruits to God, well, that cuts into my profit, because the first fruits are the ones that are most valuable. They're the ones that are the richest. If you're talking farm products, they are the richest. They're the best. The best ears of corn are the first ones. The best cabbage is the first one. The best whatever is the first one. And you'll get more money for those. And so Cain held that back, apparently, a lot like Ananias and Sapphira of the New Testament. And he offered to him what he wanted to offer. In John, 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, John says that Cain's actions were evil compared with the righteous actions of faith or of Abel. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4 is already mentioned. Abel offered by faith, and the indication is that Cain did not. But it's not a matter of plants versus animals, I don't believe. It could have been that, but I don't think it has to be defined in that sense. Cain offered that which was unacceptable to the Lord because it's not what God asked for, whatever it was. And I tend to think that it's more the quality of the offering that's involved here, the quality of the heart that produces or brings forth the quality of the offering. Abel offered from the firstborn of his animals, the herd of the herd, the choice cuts of meat. Cain offered simply vegetables, and apparently not the first fruits. We need to be careful, brethren, when we think about worship. We can follow the rules, instrumental or non-instrumental music, no women leading in prayers, scriptural songs, sound sermons, giving the 10th or whatever it is that you give according to your heart. We can follow the rules and make sure we get all 5 things in there. But if your heart's not in it, we're no different than Cain. When you sing a song, it needs to be the first fruits of your heart. When you preach a sermon, if you get up on Sunday morning and think, I forgot to get my lesson ready this week, I'll just pull out something over here and give them whatever, they won't know the difference. You've offered Cain's offering. You need to put your heart into offer the first fruits every time you offer worship to God, whether it's in a church building or your home. The prayer that you pray driving down the street, it needs to be from your heart. Don't offer Cain's offering. Don't offer something just because it's the rule, you have to do it. God reprimands Cain, and I think we need to listen. Lest we offer something that's empty and void, like Cain did. It says in verse 7, if you do well, God speaking to Cain, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. This is the first use of the word sin in the Bible. We know there was sin in Genesis chapter 3, but this is the first time the word appears. And it's, if you think about it, if you look at what's being said, it's animated. It's or personified maybe is a better word. It's a monster that's crouching at the door. It's a monster in the darkness that's waiting to devour you. Its desire is for you. Its fangs are dripping in saliva, just waiting to destroy you, to ambush you, to devour you. God is speaking to Cain. He's speaking to me. But Cain, God says, has the ability to rule over this monster. It desires to devour you and subdue you, but you have what's within you to rule over it. This goes absolutely against sinful nature, because sinful nature absolutely says you can't. You can't rule over it. It's your nature to sin. Cain was responsible for his behavior. Sin wanted to devour him, wanted to rule over him, but he couldn't sing or say with, was it Flip Wilson? You guys are too young for him. But Flip Wilson, who said, the devil made me do it. Cain didn't have that excuse. According to what God says here, its desire is for you, but you should rule over it, indicating that it's possible for you to rule over it. David writes in Psalm 19, I don't have it up there. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sin. Let them not have dominion over me, that I shall be blameless, and I shall be innocent of great transgression. With the help of God, we can rule over our sin. And I think the implication here is that God is willing to help Cain, but Cain's got to make a decision. Just like Adam and Eve had to make their decision, Cain had to make his decision here, but he ignored the warning. Never a good idea, and he arranged a rendezvous with Abel out in the fields and murdered him. The law of Moses says in Deuteronomy 22 that if you commit a crime out in the field, it was proof that it's premeditated. In other words, you went out there to do it so that you would not be seen in public. So you enticed your victim out there, or you rustled your cow out there. You did it out of public view, which says it's planned and premeditated. And the idea that is pictured here in the story of Cain and Abel, that it happened out in the field, is an indication that this wasn't a ruckus at the dinner table, Cain enticed his brother out there so that he could kill him. This is not a lapse in judgment. It's calculated murder. And the word killed, when it describes what the text describes what Cain did, it's the word, when you translate it into the Greek, it means to murder. The Hebrew word means to be ruthless, ruthlessly violent. So it's, well, look at what how John translates it. For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brothers were righteous. The word that John uses here in the Greek is the word spatzo, S-P-H-A-Z-O. Well, that's the English characterization of those. Anyway, it means to butcher, to slaughter. The regular word for, there's another word they use for murder that just, you killed somebody, you murdered somebody, but John uses a more violent word than murder. Murder is pretty violent. But the word that John uses here means to butcher or slaughter, not just knock somebody up on the head, but to be so enraged that you cut him into pieces without mercy, with brutality. Much like the Jews oftentimes treated the prophets. It's a violent thing. When the world turns against us, brethren, when they turn against God and they turn against us by way of persecution, it's not going to be a pretty thing. And I think we have that to look for in our future, maybe not too far distant future. The world is more and more getting sick of God and sick of God's people. And it's happened in generations past, historically. It happened in the time of the Roman Christians. It's happened since. And I think it's coming to us eventually because of the great hatred of God that's taking place in our culture. And it'll eventually turn upon God's people. Jesus said as much. Paul said as much. Peter said as much. And when they do, it won't be pretty. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, that we need to prepare our kids. We need to prepare the church of this generation to prepare the next generation for the persecution that I believe is coming. Either great persecution is coming or the Lord's coming in judgment, or it could be both, the way Revelation describes it. But we need to prepare for it and prepare our churches for it, lest they lose their faith in time of persecution. Read the book of 1 Peter. Sit down and read it with an open heart and open mind. Try to see what Peter was saying to those people and how they should respond in those times of affliction, in those times of fiery trial. How should they respond? It's not the response that you want to give, or that when we live by the flesh, it's not the response that we tend or want to give. If we're led by the Spirit, we give a different response. I'd like to have the opportunity to study that with you sometime, but that's the book of 1 Peter, and that's not where we are. God comes to Cain and says, "Where is your brother Abel?" And I don't know. Not my job. I'm not his keeper. Pretty bold to stand before God and just outright lie. And God becomes divine judge at this point. He says, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. I know where he is. I know what you've done." God would later say in Leviticus that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and it's a pretty horrendous crime in God's eyes to shed innocent blood. The bloodshed of the innocent must be atoned for. We find that throughout the scriptures, demonstrated in many ways, and it's a spiritual principle. It must be atoned for. Even when murder could not be solved as to who did it or what caused it, provision was made for atonement according to Deuteronomy chapter 21. Innocent blood. Paul says, it's not your responsibility to seek vengeance, but God will. Vengeance is his. He'll take care of it. The persecutions that might come upon you when the world turns against you, God will take care of it. It's his job. It's not yours. It's his. But the point is, it will be atoned for. The innocent blood cries out from the ground, and God will. God hears it, and he will take care of it. The Hebrew word that Moses uses here, cries out. It's just that. It cries out expecting an answer from God. It's the word that is used in Genesis chapter 41 for those who are crying out for food. It's used of the Israelites in Egypt when they cried out to God. It's used of a rape victim who cries out in Deuteronomy 22. A 5th century bishop writes, blood, to be sure, has no voice, but innocent blood that has been spilled is said to cry out not by words, but by its very existence, and to make demands of the Lord, not with eloquent discourse, but with anger over the crime committed. So innocent blood cries out, why is this happening to me? Why did this happen to me? And God answers. Abel's blood cries out for justice. It polluted the ground, you might say, so that Cain could no longer receive fruit from the ground. As already mentioned, Adam's curse was the ground would not willingly yield, but it would. But with Cain, it would not yield at all. Thus, he would become a vagabond, a traveler. A lot of questions here that we don't have answers to. Who was Cain's wife? Where did he get his wife? Where did these people in Nob come from? These are details that are not in the text, but they're not, some people say, well, God created other persons and Adam and Eve were just one among many, and there's just lots of excuses or lots of things that are brought up as reasons here, or non-reasons actually. We're not given all the details. God didn't give us everything that happened in Genesis 1 through 4. There's a lot more going on. There are kids being born by Adam and Eve. There are kids being born by Cain. I don't know if Abel was married and had kids or not, but there are, Cain's wife was either Abel's child or his own child, or it could be one of the other children of Adam and Eve that were not named, could have been one of their children. Because people are living hundreds of years, it would be easy to wait 20 years or 30 years or however long, 10, 15 years, for a girl to come of age and you marry her. And back then, incest was not incest. Incest became a problem. There became an issue at the time of the law of Moses, but in the beginning, it wasn't an issue. That's another story to get into that I don't have time to get into, but incest was not as we define incest, the reason the incest became a problem is because the gene pool had become so distorted because of what man had done, God said, don't do that. Don't marry your sister anymore. Don't marry your cousin anymore. But up until that time, it was perfectly fine to do that. Um, that was the only way the earth is going to be populated, because Adam and Eve were only two people. They had children. Their children had children. Those children had to come from within the family group. But it was a pure genetic line at that time, as pure can be, because first created, and it wasn't an issue. It was only when the gene pools began to get become corrupt for various reasons, and you keep the same gene pools within the same gene pools within the same gene pools, you're just going to propagate the issues of the problem. So God said, don't do that anymore. Marry outside your family. But these issues aren't gone into in the text. They're issues that we bring to the text, that because they're not in the text, God's really saying it's not part of the story. It's none of your business. That's not what I'm writing about. The story here is that God wants sacrifice. God wants worship. I think worship is necessary, not only because it's God's command, but I think it's a part of who we are. We need to worship, and when we deny ourselves that energy is focused elsewhere, and it's usually towards self, and that's not healthy. But these are all all those questions that aren't answered aren't intended for us to. There's nothing we can gain from finding those answers. What we need to know is God wants to be worshiped. He expects us to worship. He's given us the means by which we can worship. He's given us the appropriate way to worship. It needs to be worshiped from the heart, and we need to love our fellow man as we love ourselves. These are all implied teachings from the text. We will, it is 5:51. I've got about 20 minutes left. Well, let's just read the text and get as far as we can in the next few minutes. And Cain knew his wife. She conceived, bore Enoch, built a city, called the name of the city after his name, Enoch. To Enoch was born Arad. Arad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methushel, and Methushel begat Lamech. Lamech took for himself two wives. The name of one was Adah, and the other was Zilhah. And Adah bore Jabal, who is the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who play the harp and the flute. And as for Zilhah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Then Lamech said to his wives, Adha, and Zilhah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. He felt like his crime was that much greater than Cain's. And Adam knew his wife again. Again, I don't think this is chronological. I don't think we wait till Genesis chapter 25 before there's another son. This is going back in time, probably after Abel's death, or it could have even before. But anyway, maybe not. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son named Seth, for God appointed another seed for me instead of Abel. So that's after Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Cain's wife, probably a sister, close relative, none of our business where Cain got his wife. Lamech, he's, I don't know, singing a song, bragging about the fact that he killed a young man and who had wounded him. And he seems to think that this is a matter to brag about. And he sees that if Cain is going to be avenged sevenfold, then me 70 times 7, maybe thinking that his crime was that much greater than Cain's. I'm trying to skip through some stuff here to so we can move on and get in through to the text. Let's go on to Genesis chapter 5. I don't think there's anything more. There's some things to talk about in Cain's lineage, the people who were teachers of ironwork, how to work iron, teachers of music. These came from Cain's family. It's not saying that it was necessarily bad. In fact, it might be just the opposite. It might be saying that God, even though Cain was a sinner and God judged him, he still blessed Cain's family. They had talents and abilities, and these things, being workers of iron, making music, these things aren't necessarily in conflict with the ways of God. And so God wasn't cursing all of Cain's family. He cursed Cain and punished Cain, but those who were descendants of Cain weren't necessarily cursed. It says that, there in verse 26, that people began to call upon the name of the Lord again. So apparently there was a time frame that things really went south. And upon Seth's birth, ever how long it was later, and during the time of his son, Enosh, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. God was beginning to be worshipped again, while the rest of the world was going through a really dark time. Chapter 5, this is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day that they were created. So again, we've gone back in time again for Moses to make another point in the story. So we find Moses doing this back and forth. So I'm just reminding you there that, chapter 4, talking about Cain, knew his wife, or Adam knew his wife Eve, and they bore Cain and Abel. That didn't necessarily happen after the events of Genesis chapter 3. It could have been during the events of Genesis chapter 3. It could have been during the events of Genesis chapter 2. But it didn't come into the story to be recorded till chapter 4. Same here in chapter 5. And Adam lived 130 years, begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and named him Seth. And he begot Seth. After he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years, begat Enosh. After he begat Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh lived 90 years, begat Canaan. After he begat Canaan, Enosh lived 800 years. And then we have Seth's family all the way down through verse 19. And Enoch begat Jared, and after Enoch begat Jared, Jared lived 800 years and had sons and daughters. So the days of Jared were 962 years. Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And after he begat Methuselah, he walked with God 300 years, had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. He was a young man. And Enoch walked with God, for he was not, for God took him. Methuselah lived 187 years, begat Lamech, and this is not the same Lamech that we read about in chapter 4. After he begat Lamech, Methuselah lived 700 years and 782 years, and had sons and daughters. All the days of Methuselah were 969 years. That's the greatest thing that we can think about Methuselah, is he lived 969 years. And if you do the math, I've done it. I'm not a mathematician, but I believe I recall that if you do the math, figuring out everybody's birth and what Genesis chapter 6 will tell us, Methuselah died the year of the flood. Did he die in the flood? I don't know, but he died the same year the flood came. Um, the thing that keeps coming um, out in Genesis chapter 5 is so and so begat so and he died. So and so begat so and so, he lived so many years and he died. So and so begat so and he lived so many years and he died, and he died, and he died. The point is, and he died. Death is a part of life because of the fall of Genesis chapter 3. We brought death into uh, our existence. It's here because of us. We will one day die. I like also what he says there in chapter 5, verse 3, speaking of Adam, and Adam in his own likeness after his own image bore a son. If you recall back in Genesis chapter 2, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. So Adam is in the image of God. Adam has a son who is in his image. I think the image there, my understanding is um, that image of God continues to go through the seed line. Not the sinful nature, but the image of God continues to go through the seed line. And each of us comes to an age whereby we will have the opportunity to prove that or go against that. All right, I don't have opportunity because the way I'm doing it tonight to ask questions. If you have questions on the text, I'm sure you have some. I want to begin next week a little bit differently. I asked you to give me 2 sermons from the book of Genesis. I'm going to give you an illustration next week of a sermon from the book of Genesis. I won't tell you what it is right now. I was going to do it tonight, but time got away from me. But next week, I'm going to give you a sermon. It's not a sermon that you can give back to me. You got to come up with your own. But I'm going to give you an illustration of a sermon from the book of Genesis, using Genesis as the text, not necessarily staying in the book of Genesis, but it needs to be understood that the lesson is from the book of Genesis, and we can go to other places in the Bible that subject might take us to. But the subject matter, the text, the meat of the lesson needs to come from the book of Genesis, and I'll give you an example of that as we begin our hour next week. All right, I'm going to cut it off here, and I apologize for doing it this way, and hopefully next week schedule will be where we can have our live discussions. I prefer to have it live so that if you have questions, we can talk about those things. God bless, and I will see you next week.